Hi everybody and welcome to the second video in a short series exploring Theme 4's 4.5. In the previous video we were looking at 4.5.1, which was about public expenditure. So what we were looking at was the different types of public expenditure or government spending. So capital expenditure, current expenditure and transfer payments. We then focused on the difference between the size and the composition of government spending. And then we looked at how changing or how increases in public expenditure would impact on things such as productivity, living standards, the crowding out argument, the level of taxes and equality. Now, in this second video, we're going to be looking at taxes. Okay, so we're going to be looking at different types of taxes and the impacts that taxes will have on the economy. Right, now, before I jump into these different types of taxes, I think it's worth just sort of mentioning briefly why we tax people. No one likes to be taxed. No one would volunteer to pay taxes generally, but they form a very, very important purpose across the economy. Taxes, first of all, one of the biggest reasons for them is that it funds public expenditure. So current expenditure, capital expenditure and transfer payments, that money has got to come from somewhere. So taxation is a really, really important source of revenue for governments. Without taxes, they can't do all that spending that takes place. Another key reason for taxes could be about redistribution. So it's about, trying to reduce inequality, taking money off richer people and passing that back on to lower income people to tackle things such as relative poverty, income inequality, and making that Laffer curve shifting inwards over time. Another key reason could simply be to intervene in markets. So if we want to stop people demanding negative externalities or demerit goods, well, taxes can make these things more expensive and therefore make people less likely to buy them. When you think about it, this will form a key part of environmental policy. If we want to stop people creating lots of carbon emissions, then taxes are a really good way of nudging people away from those environmentally damaging products. We could also argue, though, that what taxes do, they could be used as policies to improve trade performance by making imports more expensive. Things like tariffs. We could also raise taxes that people pay to make them poorer, which will reduce the demand for imports. So taxes form lots and lots of important purposes across the economy. Right, everyone, now you've got here some different types of taxes. Now I'm going to focus first of all on the two at the bottom of the page, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct taxes are taxes on income. In other words, they come directly out of what you earn. So, for example, income tax is a direct tax. National insurance contributions are a direct tax that people pay. Corporation taxes is a form of business tax. It's taken directly out of the incomes of those particular businesses. Indirect taxes are taxes that you pay on expenditure. So when you buy goods and services, you will pay VAT, for example. When you buy property, there is something called stamp duty, which is a tax on buying property. There are excise duties, which are taxes placed on things such as petrol, other sources of fuel. We would pay similar taxes on sugar products. So direct taxes and indirect taxes. Now, what we can then also see taxes as is either proportional, progressive, or regressive. Now, a proportional tax is, as incomes increase, you pay the same proportion as your tax's income. So, for example, if somebody earned £10,000 per year and they paid a 10% tax, well, they're paying £1,000 tax. Someone earning £20,000 per year might pay £2,000 tax. Well, as a proportion of what they earn, it's exactly the same. So as incomes grow, you pay the same proportion tax. A progressive tax would be the more you earn, the higher percent you pay in tax. So in the UK, for example, income tax is a progressive tax. Okay, so most people will pay 20% tax on their income, but if your income goes beyond a certain level, then you might pay 40 or 45% tax on that additional income. So the logic is the more you earn, the higher percent tax you will pay. Regressive taxes are taxes that take a bigger proportion of the income of low income earning people compared to high income earning people. Now, many people would argue that VAT on things like demerit goods are a regressive tax. And that if a low income person buys a packet of cigarettes, the tax they pay will form a bigger chunk of their income than what it would do for a higher income person. Now, we can look at this by looking at the diagram on the right hand side. On the vertical axis, we've got the total tax paid, and on the horizontal axis, we've got the income. Now, look at the proportional one. The idea is as incomes increase, you will pay more tax, but it's in proportion to what you earn. So logic would be someone earning £100,000 per year might pay £10,000 tax. That's 10% of what they earn. Someone on a much lower income, maybe £10,000 per year, would still pay 10%, and that would be £1,000 tax. Now, a progressive tax, look how this line becomes steeper. As incomes increase, you pay a bigger proportion tax of your income. A regressive tax, you tend to find these taxes will impact more on lower income people than what they will do on higher income people. So guys, you've got their progressive, proportional, and regressive taxes. Right, what I would now like to do, please, is to take stock on what we've just done so far in this video. So question 1A, explain with examples the following types of taxes. Now you should be able to come up with some really good examples of progressive and regressive taxes, direct and indirect taxes. Proportional might be a little bit more difficult. It's a bit of a challenge. Do some research, try and find some examples of proportional taxes. And then B, outline 3 potential reasons why governments impose taxes. At the start of the video, I mentioned several different reasons why governments will tax people. Try and get some of those ideas down, please. So if you can now hit pause, write down your answers, and when you're ready, hit play, and we'll move on with the rest of the video. Right, everyone, what we're now going to be thinking about are the impacts of taxes on markets, how taxes impact on the economy. So we're going to be thinking about direct and indirect taxes. Now, as a reminder, a direct tax is a tax on income. So when you generate an income, it's a tax that you pay on your income. Indirect taxes are taxes on expenditure, so a tax that you pay when you buy goods and services. Now, generally, what we would say is that direct taxes in Britain tend to be progressive. The reason why they're progressive is the more money you earn, generally the higher percentage tax that you will pay. Indirect taxes are generally quite regressive. The reason why these taxes are quite regressive is they don't discriminate between high or low income people. So if somebody spends £100 on goods and services in a shop, they will pay the same VAT as what someone would do on a higher income compared to a low income. Well, these will therefore impact more negatively on lower income people than higher income people. So what we therefore generally suggest is when it comes to incentives to work is that direct taxes can generally lead to a disincentive to work. And that's because the more money you earn, the higher percent tax that you will pay. Indirect taxes generally can increase the incentive to work. Because if somebody wants to be able to afford their goods and pay their VAT, etc., they've got to be able to earn more money to be able to fund that basket of goods and services. So guys, direct taxes can often lead to a reduction in the incentive to work, whereas indirect taxes can lead to an increase in the incentive to work. The next one, I'm linking this specifically to inequality or income distribution. So remember, direct taxes are taxes on income. These are genuinely progressive, like income tax. So these will have the impact of lowering inequality. Whereas indirect taxes are quite regressive. These will therefore increase inequality. Now look at the data at the bottom of the page here, which kind of backs this up. We've broken up the population into 5 different income brackets. So looking at this, the poorest 20% of the population, when we look at their income and their benefits, it comes to roughly £12,690 per person per year. The next poorest 20%, just over £20,000 per person per year. When we look at the richest 20%, it's £83,950 per person per year. Right, then look what we get. Direct taxes. Remember, direct taxes are income taxes. These are generally progressive, and we can see this here. Direct taxes only will take 9.9% of the income of the poorest 20%, but they will take 24.2% of the income of the richest 20%. Now, when you look at indirect taxes, it's the opposite problem. The bottom or the poorest 20% of the people, well over a quarter of their income is used to pay indirect taxes. Whereas for the richest 20%, it's a far lower percent that we've got here. So remember, direct taxes are generally quite progressive. They will take a smaller proportion of lower income people's income than they will the richest 20% of people's income. Indirect taxes are generally quite regressive. They take a bigger slab of the income of poorer people than they do richer people. Now, what you've then got is taxes in total. And what you can see here is that taxes in Britain are generally, you could argue, quite regressive. They take a bigger proportion of low-income people's incomes than they do of higher-income people's incomes. So everyone, overall, if you wanted to, and this is the big problem we've now got, if you wanted to raise the incentive to work, then you would be looking to raise indirect taxes, not direct taxes. But if you want to reduce income inequality, then you're doing the opposite. You'd be looking to increase direct taxes but lower indirect taxes in our country. Right, now you've got a new diagram. You've got here a diagram called the Laffer Curve. Now, what we've got here in this diagram, on the horizontal axis, we've got the tax rate. And then on the vertical axis, we've got the tax revenue. Now, what you'd expect to happen if you were to increase tax rates, it would mean that more people are paying more taxes. And that would mean that the government would generate more tax revenue. Now, that is true to a certain extent, but if you were to make tax rates too high, then you are taking away the incentive to work, but also you're taking away the incentive to create businesses. So if you make tax rates, let's say, of 100%, no one's going to go to work, which would mean that you would get no tax revenue at all. If you made tax rates 100%, nobody would want to create businesses. So you would get no taxes from businesses either. But also, if you made tax rates too high, then you will incentivize tax avoidance and tax evasion. So tax avoidance is legal. That's finding clever loopholes in tax laws. You may be using tax havens, etc. Tax evasion is illegal. This is people doing things cash in hand, etc. In other words, they're deliberately and illegally not paying their taxes. Now look at the diagram, everyone. Look at the red line, the Laffer curve. Originally, when we increase tax rates, tax revenue will grow. As you raise tax rates, more people are paying direct and indirect taxes, and tax revenue will grow. But then look at that. Once tax rates go beyond T star, tax rates would now actually lead to tax revenue falling. But the reason being, if you make tax rates too high, tax revenue will fall because people look to avoid or evade paying taxes. So tax revenue will start to actually fall beyond T star. So what you would argue is T star is the optimal tax rate. If you make tax rates too high, tax revenue will fall. But if tax rates are really low and you raise them, then tax revenue will originally grow. So Laffer curve, a really, really important diagram to get your heads around. It's worth noting, though, that the optimal tax rate, in other words, the tax rate that maximizes tax revenue, will differ from tax to tax. So for some taxes, it might be 50%, others it might be 10%. And it will also differ from country to country as well. Okay, so it's really, really important for governments to work out optimal tax rates for different taxes. Right, anyway, let's now think about other impacts of taxes on the economy. Now, you've got here some different diagrams. Let's think about what we're saying with these here. Now, we've got to remember, first of all, that taxes are a withdrawal or a leakage from the economy. So if you were to raise direct taxes, so income taxes, for example, or corporation taxes, then you're going to lead to an inward shift in aggregate demand. In other words, that top right-hand corner diagram. If people pay more income tax, they've got less disposable income. So that would lower consumption. If you also raised corporation taxes, businesses got less incentive to want to invest, and that would also reduce aggregate demand. Now look at the second diagram. If you were to increase indirect taxes such as VAT, then you are inflating the cost of production. Well, therefore, SRES will move inwards and it will create cost-push inflation. Now, guys, look at both of these first two diagrams. So this is really, really bad. If we raise direct taxes too much, it's going to kill aggregate demand. If we raise indirect taxes too much, it's going to significantly increase costs of production for businesses. These are both really, really bad for GDP, employment, and particularly with the second diagram, it's not very good for inflation either. Now, it's also worth noting as well, look at the bottom diagram, that if you make tax rates too high, it can lead to an inward shift in long-run aggregate supply. If, for example, you increased direct taxes, such as income tax, you might reduce the supply of labour, less people become willing and able to work. But also, if it's discouraging businesses, that's less investment, less capital, and that would also reduce the LRAS curve in the economy. One final thing that's worth noting here as well is that what taxes can do if they become too high, it can create a wage price spiral. I think about what we mean by this. If you were to raise, let's say, indirect taxes, that means that the cost of living will start to increase. So to finance that, people will then demand higher pay rises. And if you get higher pay rises, it means that business costs will again increase. But that means that firms have to raise prices again, which means again that wage rates have got to grow. Now, what all this will do, it will lead to a significant growth in inflation, and that could then lead to a reduction in our international competitiveness. Okay, so when you raise these taxes too much, you've got some really, really bad impacts on the economy. Trade balance, though, how will taxes impact on trade performance? Well, if you were to raise direct taxes, you're making people poorer. Well, this becomes an expenditure reducing policy. If people have got less disposable income, they can buy fewer imported goods and services, and that would improve trade performance. But if you were to raise indirect taxes, and it was tax on expenditure, this could lead to a growth in business costs, which can force prices upwards and therefore make our exports less competitive overseas. So they could be really, really bad for trade performance. Now, the last one I've got here is foreign direct investment. What we'd like to think is if you were to lower tax rates, both direct and indirect, it would incentivize more foreign direct investment into your economy. And the reason for that is you become more attractive for multinational corporations. More MNCs want to come base production in your economy, declare profits in your economy, because they'll have lower taxes to pay. Now, of course, that could lead to more investment, better infrastructure upgrades. It could lead to more job creation and more economic growth as well. Obviously, if you were to raise these taxes, it would disincentivize multinational firms from wanting to invest in your economy. Right, you've got here the overall impacts on taxes then. Now you can see here what will happen when you increase direct taxes and what will happen when you increase indirect taxes. Now, if you were to raise direct taxes, remember these tend to be things like income taxes, so they tend to become more progressive. Well, first of all, it will reduce inequality because you're taking a bigger proportion of high income people's money than you are low income people's money. It could potentially increase tax revenue for the government, but we've got to bear in mind the Laffer Curve says if we raise tax rates too high, then it could lower tax revenue due to a lower incentive to work, a lower incentive to create businesses. We also know that raising direct taxes will reduce disposable income because people get to keep less of their income when they go to work. Well, that could therefore reduce aggregate demand due to lower consumption, lower investment in the economy. If it's taking away the incentive to work, the incentive to create businesses, then SRAS and LRAS might move inwards. If it is increasing business costs, then it could lead to cost push inflation. What we do know, though, as well, if you raise direct taxes, people become poorer, imports start to go down. But also, direct taxes will mean that less foreign firms want to invest in your economy because you're reducing how much profit they can earn when they produce output in your economy. Now, when you raise indirect taxes, you've got these impacts here. Remember, these are taxes on expenditure. They could increase the incentive to work because it means that the cost of living is increasing, so people have got to work more to generate the income to afford their goods and services. It could increase tax revenue for the government, but again, we've got to be careful of the Laffer Curve. So problems such as the growing likelihood of tax avoidance and tax evasion. These lead to growing inequality because they tend to be quite regressive. They take a bigger chunk of the income of low-income people than higher-income people. If it's juicing people's real disposable income, they could lead to lower aggregate demand. They also increase business costs, which can then create cost-push inflation. And again, these can also reduce foreign direct investment into the economy. Right, guys, just to wrap up this video, you've got here question 2. I want you to think about why. I'm thinking about analysis skills here. So A, why do you think a growth in direct taxes will have these impacts on the economy? B, why do you think an increase in indirect taxes could potentially have these impacts on the economy? And then C, I want to see if you can master your understanding of the Laffer curve. So C, use the Laffer curve, so draw it, but then use that to help you explain why higher tax rates will potentially lead to either increasing or reducing tax revenue for the government. You may even think about the optimal tax rate when you draw that diagram as well. Right, guys, hit pause, put down your answers for these questions, and when you've done that, you've reached the end of this video. Thank you very much.